Welcome to another episode of the Perf Roundtable. Today we've got Kelly, Sam, and Steve and myself. And jumping off a previous episode we had where we were talking about size differences, we're about to go onto a tangent about peaking and tapering. And we thought we'd leave it till this episode or have another episode so we could dive a bit deeper into it. So the first topic that I want to cover was, how does size influence the way that we plan a peak and taper? Because when we spoke about size, we spoke about how absolute load and fatigue play a role. Steve, did you want to cover how you would plan a peak and taper for, let's go, a lighter lifter such as myself?
Okay, so if we're talking about someone smaller, generally, that we're using more load, we're generating more just volume overall throughout just general training week to week, right, in a normal micro cycle. So obviously we know when peaking, we're trying to hit like that top end of what someone's recoverable from, which can just be somewhat, I guess, more for a smaller lifter. So when we're talking about peaking a smaller person, we generally have to start giving them quite a significant amount of work because their recoverability week to week is so much larger than like a larger person themselves. So I'll always opt to kind of ramp someone into a competition pending how they're feeling and them reporting back to me how they're feeling as well. But if I see performance trending up at the same time or performance not going backwards, then we just keep kind of going. You can obviously tell from the peaks that we've ramped you right in before up to something ridiculous 2 weeks out, right? And then the peak itself is not extremely aggressive, because we know that if we go too aggressive on your peak, you then come in detrained for the competition itself.
When you mention ramping, what are you referring to? Like sets, reps, intensity?
So we'll be ramping sets into the competition. So overall, everything goes up, volume goes up. So it's just ramping volume, right? So intensity goes up at the same time because we're obviously trying to lift heavier loads as we go into the competition at the same time. We can't just be ramping volume, but the overall intensity stays the same. So intensity goes up as well. So if we're running singles alongside, let's say we're someone that responds quite well to sixes or something, we'll be adding more sets of six on like a secondary day, while even potentially adding more sets on that main day where the single is after as well. But it'll be kind of staggered in a way as we're running into the mix. So we might go 1 week will increase intensity and a set on like the secondary day or something. And then the next week on the main day, we increase, obviously intensity goes up leading into the competition on the top set or the single or whatever the person's running. And then that next week, we may increase the set there, potentially even reducing. If we look back at, I guess, the linear way of progressing things where it was like 4x4, 3x3, 2x2, 1x1 competition, whatever, we're kind of bringing sets down a bit, but we're finding someone's also where they're kind of responding. So we won't go all the way down to a 2x2. Someone like yourself, we end up at like a 5x2 or something on that main day, rather than, because you need more, and 10 reps across our session is not that much for someone small, and that will recover really well from it.
Yeah. And so I guess continuing from that, when you look back on a successful taper or a successful peak, what are the things that you're looking out for? Because you mentioned like once you get to like 2x2 or something like that for myself, it's not enough, right? And so how would you look at a program and say, okay, like this is enough for a taper, and when I adjust next time, it's probably going to be something that's similar?
So it'll come down to obviously how the athlete performed and how they felt on the day and how they feel 2 weeks out. So we look at someone that's we can see that they're slowing down, they're reporting feeling fatigued, and like just from paying attention and communicating with them, then we know what to do in the taper. But leading to how successful and how we're going to run that taper, right, is going to be how they're communicating and what they're saying. So there's no one size fits all. Generally, like if we're running, say we finish on like the 4 or 5x2 on that main session which is the competition day, we'd probably run that maybe 2 days out, and it'd probably be maybe half to 60% of what that day would be. So it'd be like a single, and then maybe 2 or 3x2 after at a lower intensity. So we're recovering, we're washing out the fatigue that someone has generated, while we're simultaneously staying trained enough to be able to perform.
Yeah. So it's relative to what that individual is doing, the way you plan your taper. Yeah.
So if we even touch on like a middleweight person, if we look at someone like, obviously, like we have people that are all over the place on like each side of the spectrum, how much they can do in their maximum recoverable volume. But if we think about someone like James Lee, like his taper cut is ridiculous. Like it's that aggressive that it just doesn't look like it makes sense. But it's what he needs to be able to perform, because we generate so much fatigue.
Yeah.
How did you find that out? Did you run him into a meet and you didn't take enough off, and you're like, geez, I need to take more off this guy?
Yeah, that's generally how we found it out. And it's just like you can just see him slowing down. Whereas someone like Danny, we don't have to cut that much into the competition.
Because he speeds up.
And then Danny had, besides maybe the last couple to start with, he used to get this massive super compensation effect, which was absurd to see, but it just used to just be bang, we're on the platform. Whereas that's what someone like James gets as he super compensates onto the platform. But it has to be super aggressive.
Why do you think that is? Like this super compensation effect for a lighter lifter is considered absurd to you versus it's almost a standard for someone that's middleweight to heavier weight?
I think it's because you're able to push your max like intensity and where you're kind of sitting on comp day more frequently, right? So you should be able to, hypothetically speaking, you should be able to get up to what you're going to hit on competition day quite frequently throughout the peak, or within like that 5% kind of range.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess like to touch on that is like heavier weight lifters, as we've spoken in the past, like need to generate momentum, and it's very important for them to do so, right? Because if they're staying near that max intensity all block long, it's just going to be very hard fatigue wise. And so like it's almost expected for them to get that super compensation effect, because once they've tapered it out, they're able to hit their max load for that one day on that meet day, and then that's it. Whereas lighter lifters, like you can hover around like 95% and much closer pretty much the whole block long.
Yeah, and we don't really need any time off. We can get straight into it. We don't need a month to have one day.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask Kelly, because both you and Sam organized a test for your taper just recently, this past week. How did that go, and what did you learn from it?
I don't think overall, I mean, I guess I'll just preface by saying that we were trying new strategies. So if it was going to work 100% straight away, I would think that I would be a fucking miracle maker. So peaking Sam squat and deadlift at the same time is quite difficult. And the whole way through that prep, even back 3 blocks out, I could see that there's something not right, and we hadn't hit something right. And I think it was a relative intensity and volume issue. Something, and you know, as you guys just talked about, bigger lifters gaining momentum and having to have momentum. We didn't quite get it the whole way through 3 blocks, 2 blocks out, if that makes sense. I'm going back now and trialing a tertiary day with squatting to see if we can gain some momentum that way in terms of movement and feeling poppy, because knowing Sam is, if it's moving slow, it means that it's not moving. Squats in general need to be fast, and if they're not fast, something's not working. And I spoke to Steve a lot about it the whole way through, and we spoke about he's just getting stronger. And when we spoke about, there's a lot of fatigue build up, blah, blah, blah. And yes, it's true, but I'm going back to adding a third day squatting and a high bar in there now to see if we can get that speed back that we missed. I definitely think the major mistake from the start was trying to reproduce a product that worked last year, given that it's a new year. And I think that affected the peak, which in turn affected the taper. There was a few things that I didn't take into consideration, which was that he's getting stronger and which was that he's moving more load with deadlifts as well. The deadlifts, we're able to nail that down right to the last minute now in terms of what intensities and what rep ranges he needs to hit per week, and we're refining that process. With squats, we've ran into issues of going too hard too soon, not going hard enough, not finding the right rep range that works. So we're still, and I know that it's been a long time, and I know that I've worked with this lifter for a long time, but the one competition that we had that was awesome was States, where I ramped it in terms of gaining momentum, and we hit the day on his heaviest squat that he'd ever done, right? By far. And he could have added another 7.5 to 10 kilos. I cannot replicate that going to Malta. There's too many variables. There's too much traveling. It's too unpredictable. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to find that balance of how much fatigue we actually need and how much we need to take it away. So anyway, I'll go back to it. We ran the 3 blocks the same as what we usually would run. And in that last block, we dropped from 3 sets of 5 to 2 sets of 4, right? The mistake was dropping that much volume, right, for 6 weeks. We had a 4-week peak and a 4-week peak and a 2-week taper.
Yeah.
It's too long.
Yeah. So going from 15 reps down to 8 reps, pretty much slashing it in half, right?
100%. And then hitting the same loads because there's no momentum. We didn't have enough momentum. So someone like him, if we finish a block on 300, you're expecting to finish the next block on 315. We haven't got the top end right. Do you know what I mean? And we've had that before, but we have to go through all this data to figure out. We've had it one prep and we've had it for a block. Remember the double block where everything just got faster and faster?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to find out whether or not that is an intensity issue from the top set, or that is a secondary or tertiary day issue because things need to move fast for Sam, and he was moving so slow that whole prep. So anyway, the taper that I ran, I think I'll look over it again. Obviously when we go to Malta, I'll have both of you boys that I'll check a lot of things over with because that's how I run. I think the taper was good, but the volume before the taper was too low to take it from.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We still had 2 squat. We still had 2 sets of pauses. So what do? You do 3 sets of pauses or 4 sets of pauses?
3 sets of pauses. So I do a top set of 4 at 6, and then a 2x4 with a 10% drop on my secondary day.
Yeah. So for the taper, I still kept in 2 sets of pauses with went from 195 to 180. So do that math in your head with the percentage drop, not much. Then on the that main day too, I still had a single at 74%, right? I still had 2 sets of 4 in there. I still, if we had peaked him so hard in that peak, that is borderlining on too much. Does that make sense? Because he still did a single at 75%. That's a lot. That's 240, 237, right? But the volume from before the taper was not enough to carry that through. That was the problem.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? 2 problems. The volume before in the peak wasn't enough. And also there's something going on with that secondary and tertiary day that's not leading to him feeling strong enough on that primary day to perform.
Yeah. So going back to the drawing board. So going back to the drawing board, like you're concluding that the taper that you've written up if he had more fatigue coming in, it would have been
okay.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. And then we had 3 singles on the Tuesday before that. That's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sets. And getting up to those singles as well. Do you know what I mean? That's not for his size, it's still a fair bit in there. But he peaked 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. After right before you did the volume slash in half.
He peaked before the taper. Like that there, right? That was all that he had left in him, because there's too much volume taken out beforehand. Does that make sense? So effectively, with how tired he was, we effectively started tapering him 6 weeks out.
Yeah. So that volume drop that we had in that last block essentially peaked me to my final week 4 squat when I hit that 310. And then we're tapering off nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
How did you feel, Sam, after that volume drop? So you went from the 3x5 and then you went 2x4, I believe it was. In those initial weeks, once volume was dropped, how did you feel?
I certainly started to feel a lot fresher. So the block before, when I had the 3x5, like those last 2 or 3 weeks, like I was putting in some pretty big work. Like I was hitting like 265 for a set of 5 and then dropping down to 235, 240 for 2 sets of 5. And it was like a lot of work. And then we transitioned into that final block where we stripped to the 1x4, 1x4. And yeah, certainly by that week 3 mark,
3 or 4, yeah,
I was feeling pretty fresh. And then that's when I hit the
80 to
90 or 290 single, and then I hit the 310 in the last week.
And it flew. That's the thing with him. It's like you've got this window that you have to hit, right? If you don't hit the window, there's not much leeway in between, because it doesn't work at the intensities that high for the whole of the prep.
Yeah.
So you have to nail it. You have to nail it right on the head. And we've done that before. We came out of the 2x3. We came out of the 3x5, remember? And then you came into that last block and the same thing happened. And then you hit that 307.5 at Pro Raw.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was it.
Yeah.
You could not get anything else out of him.
Yeah.
There's no turnaround. It's like once it's done, it's done.
Yeah. I think that's something that's much harder to work with when you're working with a bigger lifter, right? Because you've got just the one chance, and then that's it. You can't afford to add another frequency day to try and spike workload, because he'd be fatigued already.
So keep going.
I was gonna say, which is why, like in the past for States prep, when we kind of peaked landing my heaviest squat on that 5th or 6th week of the block, that's why it worked so well, because it was so predictable, because we knew in that 5th week I can squat, and I can squat heavy, and I can squat fast. So it's just about finding that after a taper to factor in the 2 weeks travel and stuff we're going to have before Malta. Yeah.
I think one of the fortunate things out of that block is you found out that Sam always needs that 2-week taper period, though, regardless of how much he's worked prior and how much fatigue he's holding on to. Like 2 weeks sounds like, even though the peak that you've just ran didn't work, prior to that, when he did slash his volume in half, it still took about 2 weeks for it to show up. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well,
It's 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks. We just have to work harder up to those 2 weeks.
Yeah. That's why we came to that decision to trial the 2-week taper, because we looked back at all kind of that 3-month block we ran with the triples, doubles, and singles, and every kind of week 2 of my block, I was feeling like really strong, which essentially would be like that 2-week taper mark, right? Like I hit a week 1 single, which is capped with intensity, and then by that week 2 of the block, I was always feeling really fast and really strong. So that's what made us come to that original decision to trial the 2-week taper, because I was essentially kind of doing that in each new block I ran.
Yeah.
But
I'm just still
what we changed was we slashed that volume in that last block where the run before we went 3 sets. I think in that middle block of doubles, we actually had 2 sets, and then we added the third set back in for the singles before I hit that 307.
Yeah. Shouldn't have slashed it. But you know what? We were just looking back and just made a decision based on what we thought might work, and it didn't. So it just means now that even though it sucks and it takes a hit to the confidence, for both programming and both lifting, at least we know now that it's really important that he works hard the whole way up to that end of that 2-week taper. And I think from an athlete perspective, I think for you, we've spoken about recovery, we've spoken about getting more sleep, we've spoken about what Sam can do on his end. I think it's just going to be, I'm convinced that we need something in there that makes you feel like you're moving faster, which I'm taking care of with that really light, speedy high bar. But it's going to be a matter of strapping in for that last block towards Malta and saying to yourself, I'm going to feel like absolute dog shit right now, but I'm going to come out okay on the other end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually make use of the 2-week taper.
You're so big that you carry so much fatigue. Yeah. I think, we get scared. It's okay with little people because they bounce back so quick. It's like the little guys might have 1 week where they're like, I feel trash. And then the next week they're okay. Whereas with Sam, it's like, how you doing? 1 week and then 2 weeks and then, it just lingers. So I was trying to find that happy medium of how much fatigue is actually acceptable.
Yeah. I think one thing that I wanted to touch upon with like peaking, right, is once you start getting 4, 3, 2 weeks out, pretty much for anyone, regardless of size, you do want some level of fatigue that's relatively high, right? So whether you're a light lifter, you might be tired 3 weeks out and just holding on. That's the thing that I generally tell a lot of my athletes, like, okay, you're here now, you're 2 weeks out, I just need you to hold on. And what that means is like, you're going to feel fatigued, but we still need these high performances from you despite this fatigue, so that when we do taper, there's something that we can taper from. Because like you've mentioned,
definitely.
like if you're fresh and you run the taper, it's just not going to work. You're not going to see that compensation effect that we see. And so I think that's where you really get tested, I guess, as an athlete. Like how much are you willing to hold on to fatigue? Because fatigue just sucks. Like everything moves slow. Your mood is terrible.
That's the hard part. That's the hard part with lifters. I don't know, Danny, you're a lifter that moves fast all the time, aren't you? Or are you someone who can move really slow? Yeah, you move fast all the time, right?
Yeah.
So when it moves slow, how do you feel? Like when you get to the end of a prep and things start moving really, really slow, how do you feel?
I feel like shit. But at the same time, I also know actually it's hard. Every single time we go through a prep and things start moving like that, I just need to step back and go, okay, like exactly. Like it becomes very mental at this point. And even though it's moving slow, we should not be auto-regulating that hard as we get deep into a prep. Auto-regulation should be saved to get you to this point. And now you're at this point, what should you be doing? You should be trying to perform.
Yep. Yeah. 100%. And we need to be performing week to week, right?
Yeah, I think on my end as a coach, and as I said before, I've spoken to Sam about this a bit, is this next prep going into Malta, I'm going to have zero influence on load choices. I'm going to let him run the ship with load choices and let him auto-regulate those load choices, because he's the one who's feeling the fatigue, and he's the one who's going to be able to press go when it's ready. I think as I said before, one of the major mistakes that we did use, and we made this choice because it worked, was trying to follow the same structure from a load selection, and we may as well have been running percentages, right? So there was weeks that, externals or, like it wasn't, other things weren't moving or deadlift intensity was coming up, that back down sets probably shouldn't have been hit the way they were. And that was because we were following pretty much what happened running into, when did we do that? Was it States?
Into nationals, yeah.
Internationals, yeah. We were pretty much following that to a T, and we shouldn't have done that because it meant that decision making based on auto regulation was clouded.
Yeah. And looking back, would you have scaled the numbers up or down with
I don't know. What do you think?
With this recent block?
Well, so
before
yeah, like
speak before the peak. Before the peak, I reckon that's when we kind of followed it too much, I think.
Yeah, so before we basically planned it out, and we basically did run percentages. So we calculated what I was hitting based off that 307 that I hit in Melbourne as a percentage. And then my first block of triples, I was basically just chipping it in the first few weeks. And then it got to the second block where I was still trying to just increase on what I did pre-nationals. And then that's when those back down sets in those like last 2 weeks of that second block were getting pretty gnarly because I was just basically trying to do more and more and more, no matter how I was feeling on the actual session. But looking back, that produced all that fatigue, which then we stripped in that last block by dropping that set, So I was putting all that hard work in trying to chip what I'd done previously, and then we slashed it, and then I started to recover too early. But nothing really felt too out of reach, right? Like I wasn't doing anything crazy where I was hitting like at 9, at 10, like it was all within my capabilities. So nothing was completely out of reach, I guess would be the easiest way to explain it. It was all, yes, it was calculated, and yes, we were following it to a T too much, but it wasn't anything where I was being stupid.
No, I think if we didn't strip that set going into the last block, it probably would have paid off.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, right? Even with the smaller people, we're trying to push to this limit of where someone can get the amount of stimulus in and recover, but not over recover. Because if we over recover, we're coming in too fresh each session for the peak as well. When we're trying to generate fatigue, you're just not generating enough fatigue. And with like so I guess in a way we can just be more static in our approach of sets and rep ranges with a larger lifter all the way in a peak, and just let the load speak for itself and generate the fatigue. Whereas with the smaller person, we're actually trying to stimulate more and push more into the peak to generate more fatigue.
So
that's correct. Like, and it's
back when you mentioned how like you wanted to ramp a lighter lifter with like sets, reps, load, everything at once. You're saying for Sam's case, a heavier lifter, like although you don't need to drop volume, if you just keep it the same and actively try and increase load or something needs to go up, but it's probably too dramatic for it to be a set, because set's probably the highest way that you can increase volume dramatically, right? Like if you want to add more workload, it's like, all right, add an extra set. That's 5 extra reps that they're doing. If he's squatting like 250 for like 5 or something ridiculous, that's an extra ton of volume.
And I think also to taking into consideration that, what was the heaviest your back downs got to?
So I hit 265 for 5, and then in the last block in the peak I ended on 275 for 3.
275 for 3. So like you don't really, for your back downs, so if we go through 275 by 310, that's 88%. So you hit 88% once. Shut up. Are you laughing at me?
It already worked out.
Because he worked it in his head. It kills me. That's only, you worked at 88% once. Whereas it's like, whereas a smaller lifter would have worked at 88% and higher the whole of the last 4 weeks training. So, it's probably is important moving forward, that we keep those sets and reps static.
Yeah.
Unless we want to go back to running a 1 week taper, which we're not going to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think regardless, like the general peaking and tapering strategy is like Steve said at the very beginning, get that individual to as high of recoverable volume as possible. And then however long they need to taper, whether that be 1 week or 2 week, adjust accordingly. But it's more likely that the heavier lifter is going to need more time to get to that peak volume and also not need too many additions to what they're currently doing. And then when they taper, it's going to be a more slower process. Whereas that lighter lifter can just get slashed in half for like half a week or a week and they're good to go.
Yeah, especially when we talk about half a week, right? Like Vicky, for example, like that's going to be a half a week taper.
Yeah. It's so funny too, like it's so funny too when you have experience, and this is just human nature, right? You get so used to working with a certain individual that you kind of go, oh shit, I've got to change my thought processes for this other individual, which is right on the other end of the spectrum type thing. I feel like now for me, because I've got so many smaller people that have come through on my books, I'm like, I got that shit under control. Now I've really got these few big fellas where I'm like, okay, I need to get my head back in that game for this moment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
that's how I.
Each type of lifter, right, has this window where we can taper from, but it's so vastly different as well at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not that I'm not meaning that I feel unpracticed with it. I'm meaning that I need to, I feel, look through and go, okay, cool. What are the factors that have affected this larger lifter that I need to make sure that I'm taking into consideration moving forward?
Yeah, 100%. That's why it's so individualized.
Yeah.
Well, it's like what we said before, right? Like we had this like year of training, which worked really well. And then we just made decisions based on that and tried to do it again. But there's a bunch of factors that now make that original plan not work anymore.
Yeah. So you've got, how many months are we at now? 18 weeks, 17 weeks?
18.6 weeks.
So you're going to be a dog for the next 18 weeks, aren't you?
Ruff, ruff.
He's got 2 weeks first.
He's got 2 weeks off. I am convinced. I am convinced that there's something not right with the squat micro, the whole squat micro. So I'm trialing. I'm trialing high bars. I'm convinced that having the pause squats after deadlifts, directly after deadlifts, made those pause squats fatigued and slow for the whole of that prep. So I'm convinced we need something fast and poppy. Where it used to be belt squat, we took belt squat out, had nothing fast and had nothing really fast and poppy. And I've noticed the same thing with Pape. That last block, Pape is a fast and poppy lifter, right? If it slows down, he's missed. It's just how he lives. So I'm bringing belt squat back in for him, because I know when we first started, he was belt squatting 3 days a week, and I took it out and it changed. His primary squats changed because that's the stimulus he needs, right? So I'm trialing the same thing with Sam. It needs to be fast. If it's not fast, it's failed in terms of not too much fatigue. It's just this, you can't drive momentum on a system that is too slow.
Yep.
You know, because he doesn't have the secondary data to push him up.
Yeah. Agreed with that 100%. Like if you're starting really, really slow, you have nowhere else to go week to week.
Nowhere to go. That's what I feel happened, because I would look at the videos or I'd see him move, and I'd see him move for 5 years and go, something isn't right the whole way through. And you know, and I said to him yesterday, you're going to know if these high bars are working. You've got to know within the first couple of weeks, because you're going to come to your primary day and go, I'm popping,
Mm.
you know, and then we move the micro around to make sure that we can keep those 3 days of squats in.
Yeah, it's a good point with the belt squat actually, because yeah, we subbed it in for Bulgarians in that last block.
Yep.
And I was hitting those Bulgarians like tempo, slow, purely as like a positional thing. Like I was basically tempoing the eccentric and concentric just to put everything in the right place. I just didn't think about that way.
Well,
Yeah,
it's like me, for example, right? If I high bar squat like at the moment on a Monday, it's just not good.
Feels like shit because you need that Monday, right?
Yeah.
You need that Monday. You need that Monday to set you up, you know, like, so we have to find what sets you up again, Sam, you know, and it wasn't slow fucking pauses, that's for sure. It just wasn't. So we need to figure out, you know, and it's going back to outliers, you know, the more experience someone gets with their lifting and the stronger they get, the more they're going to become an outlier, right? You're looking at this thing now and I'm looking at this and I'm going, right, the conventional 2 days of squatting, 1 pause squat, 1 primary squat for this lifter isn't working anymore. I need to think outside the box. I need to think outside the box to make sure that this primary day is showing up. So, you know, it might even be that you go, shit, high bar's working, but I can't do it the same day as conventional because I feel like I'm slower. Then for me, I'm going to go, okay, let's flip pauses to day 1, have a day off, and then your high bars on the Wednesday before the Friday are really fast and light.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That might be something that we trial. And I feel like because everything else is set in stone in terms of how it shows up, in terms of deadlifts and stuff like that, and your micro has been pretty set, I feel like if we made those decisions, I feel like they would pay off pretty quickly. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, but it's just a trial and error and seeing if the high bar makes you feel better.
Yeah. Well, even like I said to you yesterday, so I've hit this week already my high bar on the Monday and then the pause squats yesterday. I could already get into my legs a little bit easier for my pause squats after doing 1 session of high bar. I mean, albeit like I haven't deadlifted as heavy, so those pause squats yesterday, you know, I wasn't coming in as cooked. But I could just feel like I could bend my legs a little bit easier than what I could on the pause squats that whole block and peak.
Yeah.
It's just, I think, like I said to Kelly, they just they get my legs going at the start of the week, and I feel like I can get like access to my legs a little bit earlier after, you know, squatting heavy on a Friday and then sit on the couch on Sunday.
Yeah.
Back to working hard.
Big boy.
But then once you figure out this strategy and you figure out whether it works or doesn't work, like obviously if it doesn't work, you got to go back to the drawing board and fix something up again. But if it does work, I guess for you, what's the idea to try and peak this then?
In terms of what we'll do in the end for the squat?
Yeah, generally, what's the direction that you'll go? Say you figure out this method for Sam that works with the extra squatting day. You would keep that in going into a peak, right? And then
yes, so just really auto-regulate the high bars. So the aim in the game is Sam's supposed to be starting to use VBT and having the VBT on the high bars to make sure that obviously first off, and this is a problem that we had, both of those high bars and the core squats are masked by fatigue anyways. So it would be a strategy of trying to place the high bars where we can keep them fast enough to keep him feeling like he's in his legs enough. So my thought processes are to use the VBT right now, get some data, find out before we hit the peak, we'll tell you later, Danny, before we hit the peak, where that sweet spot is in terms of velocity and keep that sweet spot the whole way through.
Yeah. And over time, the primary day is just going to get stronger and stronger and mask that high bar more and more. And hopefully VBT keeps you in check with like not pushing too hard to where it slows down again, right? That's the general strategy.
That's the general strategy. And, you know, I'll go back to Pape, who's a 3-day-a-week squatter. Now I'm seeing I seen trends with him that he's got 2 weeks at the end of a prep, or 2 weeks at the end of a block that he can push all 3 squat days. If he does that too early, he's going to die. So it would be quite similar to Sam, you know, and the VBT will tell him because it moves faster, right? So if the VBT, let's just say his 4 squats are at 0.4 or what, I don't know what that means. I don't know how fast that is. Let's just say that it is, and for the start of the prep, that's 180 kilos. And by the end of the prep, that actually gets up to 220. That means that he's going to be able to put more on the bar on the Friday for his primary because he's managing fatigue and everything is getting stronger and faster.
Yeah. Also, if anyone's unsure what VBT is velocity-based training. So nowadays, like Steve also uses it. Like we have a machine that gets attached to the barbell and that records the speed. It records a lot of things like peak velocity, average velocity, duration of the lift, range of motion. So it records a lot of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of us are starting to trial that as well, which could be another topic.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yes. When finally start using it. We're just going to keep having small digs at you until you actually start using it, mate.
Okay.
So that's my thought. That's my thought processes, and that's how it works quite well with Pape. So now I know, like, because even though it's the second prep, I've watched the loads change throughout the block. When that Monday and Thursday go up and they start getting faster for Pape, that Saturday is going to fly. But there's a very, very small window of it happening, 2 weeks. So we need to gather some data to see if we can make that happen at the end of, we've got 3 blocks. Okay, so if it happens on the first, we've got that data and it happens on this first block that we go into. Okay, cool. Then it happens on the second block. Okay, cool. And then on the third with the peak, we can say, okay, keep your high bars at this velocity.
Yeah.
Sure.
If my theory is right, that this is actually what's setting him up because he needs to move faster, not slower.
Yeah.
Which I think it is.
Hopefully,
yeah, so it's not a load based.
Sorry?
It's not a load based movement, it's a speed based movement.
It's a speed based movement. The load is dictated by the speed.
Yep.
Getting pretty crazy how it's we're jumping into influences of like Westside now. Conjugate. How fast is it? It's crazy. It's crazy. Data driven. But yeah, I think that'll conclude this episode today. Covered a lot about peaking and tapering, and also might even introduce VBT in the future once we've gotten a solid grasp on it.
Yeah, that'd be a good chat.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Sweet. Thank you.